vehicles on the Earth-facing side of the International Space Station in the middle, the Soyuz MS-22 spacecraft at the International Space Station, just minutes away from its undocking from the orbital outpost's Rassvet module without a crew on board to begin an automated journey back to Earth and a parachute-assisted landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan. Good morning from Mission Control in Houston and the International Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center. It has been a little over 3 months since this Soyuz vehicle began leaking coolant from its heat-dissipating radiator as Roscosmos cosmonauts Sergei Prokopyev and Dmitry Petelin were minutes away from beginning a spacewalk on the night of December 14th that was ultimately canceled. The Soyuz lost all of its coolant, Roscosmos concluding that the most probable cause of the coolant leak was an impact from a micrometeoroid. The damage incurred by Soyuz MS-22 that launched NASA's Frank Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin last September prompted Roscosmos to accelerate preparations to launch a replacement Soyuz, MS-23, which they did uncrewed on February 24th, Baikonur time. 2 days later, the new Soyuz automatically docked to the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the space station. That will be the ride home later this year for Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin. Although the damaged Soyuz was analyzed by Roscosmos and deemed acceptable to return crew members to Earth in the unlikely event an emergency evacuation of the complex would be required, Soyuz MS-22 is returning to Earth today uncrewed, with all of the deorbit and entry events identical to what normally occurs for a crewed landing in a Soyuz. The only difference is that Soyuz MS-22 will deorbit sooner from the point of its undocking to mitigate the lack of cooling capability. It will be just 55 minutes between the undocking and the deorbit burn versus the usual 2.5 hours. We are about 25 minutes away from undocking that is scheduled at 4:57 a.m. Central Time. You're looking now at a live view from a balcony camera in the Russian Mission Control Center on the outskirts of Moscow in the town of Korolyov. Russian flight controllers controlling all of the events of today's undocking, the back away of the Soyuz from the International Space Station, its deorbit burn, and the landing about 91 miles to the southeast of the town of Zhezkazgan in south-central Kazakhstan, where the Russian Search and Recovery Forces, Rosaviatsia as it is called, will be on site just as if a crew was on board to recover the descent module, the only component of the Soyuz spacecraft that survives re-entry, to return it to Moscow for analysis. The cosmonauts on board the station, Prokopyev, Petelin, and Andrei Fedyaev, conducted a thermal test in the Soyuz 2 weeks ago. They entered the Soyuz with Prokopyev and Petelin suited up in their Sokol launch and entry suits. Fedyaev was in a flight suit. They closed the hatch, did not lock the hatch to that Soyuz for this thermal test. The temperatures did increase inside the Soyuz without the benefit of coolant, but not to unsafe levels. The data from that test and the analysis of the descent module of the Soyuz post-landing will provide valuable information to engineers in understanding how the Soyuz can tolerate the lack of a cooling capability. The Soyuz is returning to Earth today with 481 pounds of cargo, primarily equipment, no longer needed on the International Space Station. Without any crew members on board, that capability to return that amount of cargo was brought into play, and so the Roscosmos engineers have identified some components, some television cameras, still cameras, digital equipment, some science experiments that will be returned to Earth today in the Soyuz MS-22. The timeline of events as they will unfold over the course of the next couple of hours or so calls for the undocking of the Soyuz to occur at 4:57 a.m. Central Time, 5:57 a.m. Eastern Time. The hooks holding the Soyuz to the Rassvet module on the Earth-facing side of the International Space Station were opened about an hour or so ago. The command will be sent in about 21 minutes from now to open up the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface, holding it in place. Springs on both sides of the docking interface will push off against one another, and the Soyuz will be free to back away from the International Space Station. About 4 minutes after undocking, there will be about a 15-second burn of the Soyuz engines. This is twice as long as a normal separation burn for the Soyuz spacecraft had a crew been on board. That is designed to accelerate its departure rate from the International Space Station to a safe distance away from the outpost for the start of the deorbit burn that is scheduled at 5:51 and 19 seconds a.m. Central Time, 6:51 a.m. Eastern Time. That will be a 4-minute, 31-second retrograde firing of the Soyuz engines, a braking maneuver to allow it to drop out of orbit for its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. Just a reminder, we are only broadcasting the undocking today. All of the subsequent events of the deorbit burn, the entry of the Soyuz back to Earth, and its parachute-assisted landing in Kazakhstan will be updated as events unfold. Those activities will be updated on the blog and on the other NASA web platforms. The separation of the three sections of the Soyuz, the pyrotechnic separation at an altitude of about 140 kilometers above the Earth, is scheduled at 6:19 a.m. Central Time, followed by atmospheric entry at an altitude of some 400,000 feet above the Earth. That will be 3 minutes later at 6:22 a.m. Central Time. The Soyuz will enter into peak heating into the plasma regime of the Earth's atmosphere at 6:23 and 47 seconds a.m. Central Time, about 5 minutes in that plasma regime. And again, the Soyuz returning to Earth without the benefit of any coolant capability because of the damage it incurred to its heat-dissipating radiator back on December 14th. The command to open the chutes over Kazakhstan is scheduled at an altitude of about 10.7 kilometers at 6:30 and 50 seconds a.m. Central Time, leading to a landing at 6:45 and 43 seconds a.m. Central Time, which is 5:45 p.m. in Kazakhstan, about 2 hours before sunset at the landing site, which again is about 91 miles to the southeast of the town of Zhezkazgan. This is the first set of activities in an ongoing series of activities that will continue next Thursday, April 6th, when Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopiev, and Dmitry Petelin board the recently arrived Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft that launched in February and docked automatically to the space station 2 days later. They will board the new Soyuz vehicle, which is docked to the space-facing side of the Russian segment of the station on the Poisk module, undock and conduct a fly-around to redock at the Prishal module on the Earth-facing port that is adjacent to the Rassvet module, to which the Soyuz MS-22 is currently docked for the next 17 minutes or so. That relocation activity will open up the Poisk module to be used exclusively as an airlock for Russian cosmonauts to conduct a series of spacewalks over the next several weeks into the mid-June timeframe to continue outfitting the Naoka multipurpose laboratory module. Those spacewalks were interrupted by the coolant leak back in December that the MS-22 incurred, and which is resulting in its undocking in an uncrewed fashion and its parachute-assisted landing back in Kazakhstan in a couple of hours from now. We're about 16 minutes away from the commands to be issued for the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface to be opened. And again, springs on both sides of the docking interface holding the Soyuz in place will push off against one another, allowing the Soyuz to physically separate from the International Space Station, that coming at 4:57 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 5:57 a.m. Eastern Time. At the point of undocking, Expedition 68 will formally come to an end, and Expedition 69 will begin aboard the International Space Station, continuing under the command of Roscosmos cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev. In Kazakhstan, the Russian search and recovery forces treating this just like any other Soyuz landing, as if a crew was on board. They deployed from the staging city of Karaganda. Mi-8 helicopters will be hovering around the landing site later this morning to await the arrival of the Soyuz under its parachute. Once the Soyuz lands and is safed by the teams on the ground in Kazakhstan, the descent module, again the only section of the Soyuz spacecraft that will return to Earth, that will be returned to Moscow for post-flight analysis. It will be of great interest to the engineers to see how temperature and humidity levels inside the descent module fared during its re-entry back into the Earth's atmosphere and its landing. That will be of great interest given the fact that it has no cooling capability on board, although temperatures have been managed appropriately while docked to the International Space Station. The International Space Station and its crew of 7 are currently traveling 260 miles above the Earth, moving from southwest to northeast, about to cross the border into Yemen, moving in an inclination of 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. We're about 13 minutes away from the command to open the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface. That will take about a minute and a half to complete, and physical separation again scheduled at 4:57 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time this morning. Just a note, as you look at the Soyuz MS-22, the white section that you see the solar arrays attached to, that's the instrumentation and propulsion module, basically the lower section of the Soyuz. It is on that area where the heat dissipating radiator was struck by the micrometeoroid back in December, causing the loss of coolant. When the pyrotechnic separation of the 3 sections of the Soyuz occurs, the separation of the modules planned for 6:19 a.m. Central Time, that section burns up in the Earth's atmosphere. So any forensic evidence of that area where the damage was incurred back in December will not be able to be recovered. Only the descent module, where the crew normally would be strapped in had a crew been returning in the Soyuz today, that's the only section that survives the heat of reentry and lands under parachutes on the steppe of Kazakhstan.
МКС ЦУПу Москвы в канале СГ-1.
ISS Moscow, SG1 for Dmitry.
Включение режима записи.
Go ahead and activate the recording mode.
The International Space Station is just about passing south of Dubai in the United Arab Emirates, the home of flight engineer Sultan Al-Niyati of the expedition crew on board the International Space Station, again, just minutes away from the conclusion of Expedition 68 with the undocking of the Soyuz MS-22 today. Expedition 69 will begin, and it will remain in effect until Soyuz MS-23 undocks later this year to return Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopyev, and Dmitry Petelin back to Earth. Inside 10 minutes now until the undocking command will be issued. Physical separation again scheduled at 4:57 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time. The hatches to the Soyuz vehicle were closed yesterday by Prokopyev and Petelin after loading the 481 pounds of cargo into the descent module and strapping that cargo into place for the ride back to Earth. Again, that cargo consisting of equipment no longer needed on board the International Space Station. Now just 8.5 minutes away from the issuance of the command to open up the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface. Just 7 minutes away from the issuance of the command to open up the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface. We're in a handover right now between satellites on our tracking and data relay satellite system. We will reacquire our downlink signal from the International Space Station momentarily. About 2.5 minutes after physical separation of the Soyuz from the Rosviet module, the Soyuz engines will be commanded to a 15-second burn and a change in velocity of about 1.03 meters per second to create a fairly accelerated opening rate from the International Space Station, accelerating its departure away from the International Outpost to a distance well away from the station, Just 55 minutes between the undocking and the deorbit burn to bring it back into the Earth's atmosphere, as opposed to the normal 2.5 hours had a crew been on board. All of the Soyuz systems and its television transmitter have been activated. We'll be reacquiring our downlink TV capability just a moment or two from now. Just coming up on the 4.5 minute mark until the undocking command is issued. It will take about 90 seconds for the Soyuz hooks to open, and then physical separation will occur. And again, just a reminder for those of you watching our coverage this morning, we are only broadcasting the undocking today on NASA television and our associated web platforms. We, however, will update the deorbit entry and landing of the Soyuz MS-22 on the station blog and on social media as those events unfold over the next 2 hours, with the landing scheduled at 6:45 a.m. Central Time, 7:45 a.m. Eastern Time, which will be 5:45 p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan 2 hours before sunset. This view now from the cross-haired engineering camera on the Soyuz MS-22. You'll be seeing views both from the truss cameras on the International Space Station and this camera as the Soyuz backs away from the Rosviet module, to which it has been attached since last September. This vehicle brought Frank Rubio, Sergei Prokopyev, and Dmitry Petelin to the International Space Station, now returning to Earth today uncrewed. The 3 crew members to return later this year on the newly minted and newly arrived MS-23 vehicle. 2 minutes until the undocking command is issued.
Station Houston on 2 for Frank and the crew's awareness. 2 minutes from the Soyuz undocking command.
Once again, this view of the Soyuz MS-22 Standing by for the undocking command to be issued and physical separation. The International Space Station currently passing over northern China, soon to cross the border into Mongolia. Just 30 seconds away now from the undocking command to be issued. Again, it will take about 90 seconds for the hooks on the Soyuz to open up, leading to physical separation of the Soyuz from the Rassvet module. The International Space Station in free drift. And the hooks are now driving. Command has been issued. And we're standing by for physical separation. Undocking confirmed at 4:57 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time. The damaged Soyuz MS-22 free of its moorings at the International Space Station, heading for an uncrewed automated landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan. Expedition 68 now in the history books, Expedition 69 officially underway. A smooth back away from the International Space Station by the Soyuz. Roscosmos engineers and Russian flight controllers of the Russian Mission Control Center report good attitude control on the Soyuz.
КС ЦУПа Москвы в канале СГ-1 для Дмитрия.
RSS Moscow G1 for Dmitry, regarding modem KVD and RM1 of the vehicle to the closed position. Yes, go ahead, SG1.
Можешь переводить
Yeah, ma. You are go MRM1 Soyuz EPV into the closed position. Copy.
About 90 seconds away from the 15-second separation burned by the Soyuz to accelerate its departure rate from the station. flying some 260 miles over southeastern Russia.
MRM-1 Teka Kavade valve is in position closed. This is Dmitry reporting on Space to Ground 1. We copy.
Coming up on that separation burn and the engine firing underway. 15-second burn. This is about twice as long as is typically the case for a departure burn, designed to hasten the Soyuz's departure rate from the station. Just 55 minutes separating undocking itself and the deorbit burn of 4 minutes and 31 seconds. And the separation burn is complete and is reported to have been successful. So the Soyuz now will race away from the International Space Station to a safe distance for the deorbit burn that is scheduled at 5:51 and 19 seconds a.m. Central Time. That will be a 4-minute, 31-second retrograde firing, a braking maneuver to slow the vehicle down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit for its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. The pyrotechnic separation of the three sections of the Soyuz is scheduled at 6:19 a.m. Central Time. That'll be followed by its entry into the Earth's atmosphere about 4 minutes later, and its entry into the plasma regime, where heat around the spacecraft will build to some 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit in the period of peak heating, or I should say peak heating on the spacecraft that will be endured without the benefit of a cooling capability on this Soyuz, having incurred damage back on December 14th to lose its coolant capability through the micrometeoroid hit on its heat-dissipating radiator. The command to open up the Soyuz parachute, the large parachutes, is scheduled just after 6:30 a.m. Central Time, with landing at 6:45 and 43 seconds a.m. Central Time, 5:45 p.m. in Kazakhstan, 91 miles to the southeast of the town of Jezkazgan.
Moscow Station on Space to Ground 1 for источник for Sergei. Go ahead on Space to Ground 1. Sergei, reporting. I am working per 6235, and on page 9, the report is minus 35, minus 38, minus 76, and the time on page 10 that I need to report to you.
Принято.
We copy. So the time is 31 minutes. Everything else is nominal per the radiogram. Sergei, could you repeat 31 minutes and then...
This view from the cross-haired engineering camera on the outside of the Soyuz vehicle as it backs away from the International Space Station to a safe distance for its deorbit burn that is coming up at 5:51 a.m. Central Time, about 47 minutes from now. Flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow report that the Soyuz's onboard computers have all the information built in now and loaded into the onboard computer for the automated functions of the Soyuz for deorbit burn and all of the entry functions of the vehicle.
Sergei, let's do 1.5 a little bit later, please. Or have you switched already? If you have already switched, it's no trouble. Everything's okay. Copy. and I will leave it then. Yes, please leave it as is and continue. So 1.6 needs to be done a little bit later, please. Okay?
The Soyuz continues its departure on the correct trajectory away from the International Space Station. Again, undocking occurred on time at 4:57 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 5:57 a.m. Eastern Time, heading for a deorbit burn about 45 minutes from now at 5:51 and 19 seconds a.m. Central Time, a 4-minute, 31-second retrograde firing to enable the Soyuz to slow down by 128 meters per second, enabling it to drop out of orbit for its high-speed return back into the Earth's atmosphere and a parachute-assisted landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan.
МКС ЦУПу Москвы в канале СГ-1. Ребят, для информации, мы начали выполнять разворот после...
Station Moscow Space to Ground 1, just FYI. We are starting the maneuver to the duty attitude.
With the Soyuz MS-22 on its way headed back to Earth in just about an hour and 40 minutes or so from now,
Copy, thank you.
the Expedition 69 increment on board the International Space Station officially underway, continuing under the command of Roscosmos cosmonaut Sergei Prokopyev. He, Dmitry Petelin of Roscosmos, and NASA's Frank Rubio will board the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft next Thursday, April 6th, undock their spacecraft from the Poisk module on the space-facing side of the International Space Station, can conduct a relocation fly-around of the station to redock at the Prishal node module on the Earth-facing side of the complex. That will open up Poisk to be used exclusively as an airlock for Prokopyev and Petelin to conduct a series of spacewalks over the next couple of months or so to continue the outfitting of the Naoka multipurpose laboratory module that was interrupted back in December by the strike on the Soyuz by the micrometeoroid that resulted in the loss of the Soyuz coolant and the subsequent events leading up to today's undocking of the damaged Soyuz spacecraft.
Moscow Station on Space to Ground 1.
And so, with Soyuz MS-22 having undocked on time at 4:57 a.m. Central Time, 5:57 a.m. Eastern Time, that will wrap up our coverage on NASA television. However, we will continue to follow the Soyuz through its deorbit burn, its entry activities, and its landing on the steppe of Kazakhstan on the NASA website, the blog, and other social media platforms, all the way through landing that is scheduled at 6:45 a.m. Central Time, 7:45 a.m. Eastern Time, 5:45 p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan, some 2 hours before sunset. So until then, we'll wish you a good morning and a good day. This is Mission Control Houston.
NASA celebrates Women's History Month.
Planning for future generations requires us understanding how much water we have.
And we need to understand the water cycle in a lot.